Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Facebook Live Compost Workshop. We are in week 5. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Catherine. I'm the Facilities and Sustainability Manager here at the Living Coast Discovery Center. We are a small nonprofit zoo and aquarium located in Chula Vista, California, uniquely situated on the San Diego Bay Wildlife Refuge. Usually at this time on a Sunday, when we are open to the public, I hold an on-site composting workshop. That goes about an hour to an hour and a half, depending on how many people are here, what types of questions they have. So even though we are closed to the public during our COVID-19 pandemic, I hope the information that you've received from this compost workshop series has been helpful to you. If you maybe already had been composting and you've been running into some trouble with your compost pile, or maybe you're starting from scratch, maybe it's a new science experiment for the kids that are at home from school. But just one thing to remember, that composting is as easy as taking food, putting it into a pile. We've gone over the different ways throughout the course of our workshop. And what we end up with is healthy soil amendment. Composting will happen whether you put a lot of effort into it or not. So if you haven't had a chance yet, you can look back on our Facebook page. We have a playlist of our compost workshop series, so you can find out what method works best for you. We've also put these videos on a YouTube playlist. So if you prefer that mode to view your videos, or if you have friends and family members or even teachers that would like to access that content, please feel free to share. For this week's topic, we're going over application methods of compost. So in the prior weeks, we kind of went over how to start a pile in different methods, in a bin, in a tumbler, a hole in the ground, how to maintain that pile, and we even went over how to sift finished compost. So in today's video, we're going to take that finished compost and apply it to our vegetable garden that you see behind me here. One really important thing to take back is organic matter in the soil is very important. If you've been tuning in on previous Living Coast videos, you might have learned a little bit about how marshes sequester carbon from the atmosphere. Same thing in our soils. So if we're adding back organic content, microorganisms, fungi, even insects, into the soil, their symbiotic relationships will help take the carbon out of the atmosphere, turn it into something usable for the plants, and then the plants use that material and of course bring us back some nice oxygen. So it's a nice circle or loop that we can feed into by taking what we used to see as waste, food waste, plant waste, and instead of sending that organic material to the landfill, where it actually poses more problems. If you remember, I talked about methane emissions in a previous video, right? We can lower our methane and improve soil to sequester more carbon. Now, if you have very, very hard clay, which a lot of places here in San Diego and Chula Vista do, you'll know that it's hard to grow vegetables like the ones you see behind me here. They need a much more nutrient-rich soil, something a little softer too, so that the plant roots can make their way deeper into the soil to get more nutrients, gather more water, and take a nice hold into the soil so your plant is nice and sturdy. If you have softer soil, but you've noticed that your plants are growing at a very slow rate, maybe they aren't producing much fruit, or you've noticed they've been overtaken by pests or other things like powdery mildew, or their legs, their leaves are just droopy. So applying compost, whether it be a liquid version or just applying it to the soil, will help improve those plants to make them nice and strong and fight off pests and disease. Remember, pests and disease go for the weaker plants. So instead of applying a lot of pesticides and inorganic fertilizers to your soil and plant, and therefore contaminating the soil, using compost as a natural fertilizer and pesticide will take away that harsh chemical in your garden. So you'll feel safer and more confident about the food that you're growing in your backyard. Now remember, at any point, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comments. I'm joined by educator Ashley today again, so she'll be able to read off any questions you may have.
So Kat,
yes.
Of questions, Richard has asked, well, more like stated, the compost pile I started has tons of fruit flies. Help.
Okay, so tons of fruit flies. So you may not be covering your fresh food scraps that well. Remember, you need to do your layering method, especially if you just started your pile, with your browns and your greens. Mix that up and always top off with a 3 to 5 inch layer of dry browns. This should help keep the flies away. And remember, if you're adding any new greens to your pile without, flipping the whole thing over, make sure you get in there, put a glove on your hands so you don't get dirty, but get down pretty deep and add those fresh greens towards the very center of the pile. Any more questions, Ashley?
Not right now.
Okay, so going back to ways we can apply this compost, you can mix it into existing dirt. You can layer it over the top to act as mulch, especially if you already have a plant like we do back here that's already growing but needs a little bit more help, some more nutrients. You can apply the mulch directly on top without disturbing the root zone. And if you have a very large backyard, or maybe you have, let's say, like lawns, you can create a compost tea to take a small amount of compost and create this liquid fertilizer that can be stretched and applied to your whole garden and backyard. So I'll be going over how to make that today. The teas that you can make, of course, are not for you to drink, but for your plants, can vary from using vermicompost castings. Remember, I talked about the worm castings that are very, very high in nitrogen, or just using the regular old compost that you made in your soil saver or tumbler bin. Okay? So, if you decide to make a compost tea, I made a small batch today to prepare for this workshop. This is about, how big is this? Probably about like a 2-gallon, 2.5 to 3-gallon bucket here. The material inside is very dark brown. And what I did is I made a mixture. I took about a cup of regular compost and a cup of worm castings, and I actually repurposed my reusable produce bag here, and I added the compost in there to make a tea bag. I then use a clip to attach the tea bag into the bucket, and I let it seep in here for about 24 to 48 hours. Now, what's really important though when you're making your compost tea is you need to have an aerator or bubbler. I purchased this from a hydroponic store. You can definitely find these at like Walmart, Target, or online. But this is an Eco Air pump. Looks like this. It has an adjustable setting, but I just had it plugged in and I let it brew for the day. Then you're also, of course, going to need the attachment, which is the air line with the air stone. So it's very important to have air in your bucket so that we do not grow any harmful bacteria to the plants. So remember, I've been talking about aerobic bacteria, or bacteria that require oxygen to do their processes, and that's what we want in our compost tea. It's also very important that after you brew your tea that you apply it to your garden within 24 to 48 hours so that your tea doesn't start to grow anaerobic bacteria. So in preparation of this video, I took this spray bottle here. I filled it with half part water, so 50% regular water. The other 50% I used the tea that I made. It's really important that you do dilute the compost tea that you make. Because it is very potent. So we don't want to shock our plants. We don't want to overfeed them with nutrients, actually, because that can be detrimental. So we made this worm tea here. So Ashley is going to join me in the vegetable garden here, and I'm going to go over some ways that we're going to apply this tea and of course how to apply the compost in the garden. So she'll take you around. Take a quick water break while she's doing that. So this is our volunteer garden. Of course, since we've been closed, I have been maintaining this. We've been harvesting the lettuce, kale, tomatoes, mint that we have in here. And we've been feeding it out to our staff. But I did do a major maintenance today in the garden. I trimmed back some leaves. So there are some leaves, especially here if you can see on the tomato plant, that are starting to yellow and wilt. So I removed the obvious dead leaves, but if you have this coming in your garden, you can apply the compost directly onto the foliage, like this. Okay. Great too if you have powdery mildew or any other pests that maybe you've already tried to spray with regular water or soapy water solution, and it's still not fixing itself. Try doing a few applications of worm tea, just like this. So I notice there's some white, almost maybe some powdery mildew coming in. So I'm going to spray it like this. Okay? Now, let's see what we can do with actual compost. Ashley and I have been working hard today, sifting out this material, some finished product that we have. Okay? So, if you had a completely bare area of your garden or backyard that you have never planted in before, I recommend doing the method where you kind of dig a few holes. We're going to add in some compost, like this, okay? And then we're going to mix it up. Going to mix in some more soil here. I recommend doing this to fix any hard clay or improve the filtration of sandy soils. Okay, so I'm just mixing in the compost, just like that. Okay, then I'm gonna top it off. Say you already have your garden going like we have here, and I wanna feed these plants that are already growing. I can apply the compost right over top, around the plant, okay? And then take my watering can and apply the compost that way. This is great to do around the base of your trees, fruit trees, any tree really, bushes, shrubs, potted plants. I would do it that way. And around a tree, I would probably put a thicker layer than I just did. Maybe somewhere around 3 inches would be best for a tree. Now, the very last way to add this compost is to apply it by watering your plants. So this is similar to the spray bottle, half regular water and half compost tea. And this way you can get that compost to soak into the soil a little more quickly. All right. But yeah, feel free to take a look in our garden. It's been quite hot, so I've noticed the leaves are starting to wilt a little bit more. Being this compost application that I just did will help our garden. Yeah. Sure, let's take you back.
From Scout Song, and it says compost has large populations of roly-polies in it, so I've been told to let it age in the sun before putting it on crops. Is this something you need to do? Do we need to let the compost sit in the sun?
That is a good point to bring up. It is helpful to let your compost quote-unquote cure before you apply it to the garden. So some ways you can do that is you can Monitor the temperature of your compost pile. When it starts to go below 100 degrees, 90 to 80, that might be a good indication that a lot of the material inside the compost pile is ready to sift. Ready meaning it's dark brown in color, like dark chocolate or chocolate cake. It smells earthy, not like rotting food anymore. And you can't really tell what the material is. So once you've put that through the sifter, I suggest letting it, cure in the sun for about a week or so if you had a very cool pile. If you were sifting from a hotter pile, which you can definitely do, I've sifted out of piles that are about 120, 130 degrees. I let that compost cure for another couple weeks before I apply it to the garden. So if you have sow bugs, pincher bugs, stuff like that, definitely just let it sit in the bucket or spread out on a tarp for it to properly cool, finish decomposing, and then apply it to your garden. And it's important to also sift your compost too and pull out any bigger grubs, like the white grubs that turn into the fig beetle. Those are great for composting. They eat a lot of material, but you don't necessarily want those critters in your garden to eat up your vegetables. So great question. We have any more?
We do. We have another question about the timing of application of the compost.
Yes. So the timing does vary. So of course, the way I kind of applied it today through the liquid version of compost is great to apply on existing plants. But I highly recommend kind of timing your sifting and curing of your compost at least a month or more before your next season for your plants, your planting season. And then apply that into the garden and let that sit. Let the nutrients have a chance to absorb into the soil for at least a week or two before you actually plant your new seedlings. Also, if you are starting any plants from seed or starting them in a small planter and then transferring them, it's great to also add a nice new layer of compost right on the top to provide the necessary nutrients for your seedlings. Great question. When it is really hot in the summer, it'll be a lot harder to dig through your clay. So improving your clay-based dirt might be better suited for fall and winter, just so that you're more comfortable working outdoors. And if you are having trouble digging holes, like for trees and stuff like that, and you have really hard dirt, you can dig a little, pour some water, let it seep, and come back and continue digging, and then mix in your compost that way. But yeah, hope that answered your question. Any more questions, Ashley? All right, so thank you so much for joining me for week 5 of the Compost Workshop series on application methods of compost. Next week will be our last compost workshop. We'll be moving on to some other sustainability topics though on Sunday, so you can continue to tune in. But next week, make sure you're ready to ask me any questions on your composting. I'm going to be here answering some frequently asked questions, as well as the questions that you have for me. And we're also going to take a final look at that pile that we built on week 1, just to see where it's at after 6 weeks. All right, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Bye.